Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch was the first of 3 justices nominated by President Donald Trump that have established a solid conservative majority on the court. Now, that conservative majority has ushered in monumental decisions on issues like abortion rights and presidential immunity. In his new book, it's called Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law, Gorsuch argues that Americans are at risk from an explosion of new laws. Gorsuch made his argument to Major Garrett at the Supreme Court.
You have a quote early in the book, and I want to ask you if you believe what the quote says. Do you really believe in hell there will only be law and nothing but law?
Well, I'm not sure I would go quite that far, but many people have.
Justice Neil Gorsuch in Overruled throws the book at the law.
You write that law in America has swallowed up ordinary people, intentionally or unintentionally.
Oh, I think all with the best of intentions. I've been a judge now for about 18 years, and I just saw so many cases where ordinary Americans, decent, hardworking Americans, were just trying to make their way in life. They weren't trying to hurt anybody, and yet they were caught up in the legal system in ways they couldn't hardly expect. It's a book of stories about the cases I've seen, that other judges like me have seen, cases about fishermen in Florida, monks in Louisiana, a magician in Missouri, and their experiences in a world where law has really exploded just in our lifetimes.
Are they victims?
Well, I don't know whether you consider them victims or whether you consider them emblematic of a world in which we just have so much law. Federal crimes have maybe doubled in our lifetime. Nobody knows how many federal crimes there are because it would take years just to read them. We have more people serving life sentences today than we had serving any sentence in 1970 or thereabouts. So that's the world we live in, Major. Why? You know, I'm not a psychologist or a social scientist, but I think some of it has to do with trust. I worry when more and more Americans think that people in the other political party are not just wrong, fine, but are evil. I worry when we are unable to speak to one another and listen to one another.
But in a recent poll, 70% say Gorsuch and the other current justices contribute to that problem, deciding cases on ideology rather than being fair and impartial. On that, Gorsuch dissents, respectfully.
I read the other day that in ideologically divided cases, now I don't know what that means, this last term, that I agreed with Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and Justice Jackson something like 45% of the time. That's the court I know.
But there are people who will watch this right now and say, I thought I understood what Roe versus Wade meant in our country. I thought I understood what affirmative action in college admissions meant. And this court has told me I didn't understand what those things meant, and I wrongly relied on things that I thought were settled. What would you say to those?
I'd say those are deeply complex legal questions on which reasonable minds can, of course, and do disagree. And then when it comes to Roe versus Wade, for example, what did the court decide? Decided that we, the people, should answer that question, not 9 people sitting in Washington, D.C.
How about affirmative action?
Much the same thing. What did we decide? We decided that all people are created equal, that it's not acceptable in this country to discriminate on the basis of race.
And for those who would say, but I feel something's been ripped away from me, you would say?
I would say that we're taking it back to you. That in a democracy, you're in the driver's seat. You're the sovereign. Those famous 3 first words of the Constitution empower you. Do you really want me deciding everything for you?
And for a woman in a state where she no longer has the rights she once relied on, is that cold comfort?
Major, all I can say is I don't know better than you do on these questions, and that most major Western democracies have decided these questions through the ballot box.
As an election approaches here,
we need a mandatory code of ethics for the Supreme Court, and we need it now.
President Biden is pushing for stricter ethics rules and 18-year term limits for justices, in response in part to pricey travel paid for by Republican donors.
Major, as you know, we adopted an ethics code just this term, and I think that was a significant step.
Do you believe that is sufficient?
I think it's remarkable that we were able to agree unanimously.
Does this court, today or in the future, have to understand and care about its public perception.
You raise a really interesting question about the place that unelected judges have in a democracy. An independent judiciary, our founders fought a revolution for it because they knew what it was like to have a judiciary that was responsive to the crown, to a whimsical king. And they didn't want that for this country. And the truth is, when you're the man in the dock, you don't want it either.
On the walls of his chambers and in his new book, Gorsuch holds up one founder in particular.
Who is the book for?
The book is really for the American people. James Madison, when he sat down to write the Constitution, knew a couple of things. First, we need law in our lives. And as a lawyer and a judge, I surely know that. Law helps us achieve what George Washington called ordered liberty. At the same time, James Madison knew that too much law in our lives can destroy those same things. Law contains this irony. Too little is dangerous, too much is dangerous. And so the book really raises the question, where do we stand between those two means?
What would James Madison say if he were alive today to look at the legal landscape of our country?
Well, the first thing I think he'd say is he got pretty short shrift in Hamilton. Now, I love Hamilton, okay? It is a wonderful way to teach and learn about our Constitution and its history. But poor James Madison, I mean, it grieves me.
Justice Gorsuch, right there at the end, sounds a little bit like an amateur theater critic, but there's nothing amateurish about his book. It is a thoroughly well-documented retelling of stories about Americans, Gorsuch argues, have been harmed by the rulemakers in our country. Congress, federal bureaucracies, governors, mayors, county commissioners. And yet, Gorsuch does not appear at all troubled by the decline in public confidence in the Supreme Court or the real-world ramifications of overturning decades of legal precedent. Comfort with such contradictions, of course, is one of the things that comes with a lifetime appointment to the highest judicial perch in the land. Vlad?
Yeah, many people are questioning whether it should be a lifetime appointment. Major, did you think that he had a sense of humor? Was there anything that surprised you? I like the Hamilton thing where he said, "It grieves me." Grieves you? I thought that was good.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the Hamilton reference, but it is important, I think, that to get a sense from the Supreme Court justice, any Supreme Court justice, about what they believe, especially if they're someone who is rooted in what the founders gave our country, what they would say about America today.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating, their sense of it. Some of them say, no, they would be surprised and happy that we've evolved in the ways that we have. Others say, no, it should be much more like the original words as they were written. Of course, it's just clearly in that latter camp.
Yeah, well, Major, I appreciate you pushing back on those issues because I thought it was sort of telling that the Associate Justice said, do you want me deciding everything for you? If you're a woman, you will say, but you have decided, even though you're suggesting that you're sending it back to the people, the court made those decisions that had been precedent for over 50 years, Major.
And what was once relied upon can no longer be. That's the change.
That's right. All right, Major Garrett for us. Great interview. Thank you, Major. Overruled goes on sale tomorrow, wherever you get your books.